Okay, we'll continue for my report. So let's continue the chapter 30, the cultural studies and discursive instructions of the word Englishes. So in article 5, word Englishes, politics of culture and metaphoric self. So it refers politics of culture, politics of social location, imperialism, colonialism, some metaphoric selves or translations. And also there are two main highlights in these topic that need to understand that the Englishes need to adopt a more complex and announced approach to the interplay of Western and non-Western cultures. And second, the need to privatize the very notion of culture so as to attain a deeper comprehension of its nature. So creative writers associated with word Englishes can most often be described as metaphorical selves. So the term metaphorical self has two senses here. First, metaphor in its original sense derived from Greek denoted the act of carrying across. So what these writers are attempting to do is to carry themselves from one culture topography to another. So the word translation, with which the word metaphor shares a common area of meaning, is important in this regard, in that the act of culture translation is important to their effort. Second, these writers are seeking to construct and refashion their identities through language, more specifically through the instrumentality of metaphoricity. So hence, another area of world Englishes that merits the closer research attention is what is characterized here as the metaphoric self. So the second important need is to problematize culture and the works of many of the most innovative writers of English in Africa. So the Pacific and the Caribbean and the Asia underline the facts. So the crossing and the recrossing of cultural boundaries by writers of new literatures of English focus on the function or questions of subject positions of these writers. So this hybridity manifests itself most vividly in the prose of writers from the Third World who use English as a vehicle of creative communication. So this excerpts display hybridity and self-confidence in bending the English language for those purposes the authors have in mind. And so it is important to bear in mind a distinction between two types of cultural reading. So again, it is important to bear in mind a distinction between two types of cultural reading: expository reading and interventionist reading. In expository reading, careful attention is paid to the elucidations of themes, styles, forms, techniques, and so on, but without any attention to subvert the analytical framework within which analysts have operated for so long. In interventionist reading, on the other hand, there is an attempt at self-empowerment, converting the ruling analytical protocols, bringing out the play of ideology, and expliciting the ways in which textual production is intimately linked to institutional determinations. So World Englishes as a discursive construct is a topic that increasingly generating interest among practitioners of cultural studies. So that's what the World Englishes, politics of culture and metaphoric self. So next here, the word English and gender identities. So word English is emphasized in interdisciplinary and integrative approaches and different methodologies aim to capture both the universal essence of who-ness as well as the distinct regional and social identities of different Englishes. So the sociolinguistics of world Englishes. So an integral part of world Englishes and the post-colonial experience is the notions of pluralism to refer to the multiple faces and facets of English and its speakers in the global spread of Englishization. So when we look at the research dealing with women in plurilingual settings in postcolonial context, we look at the work done on multilingual communities of English users and on the relationship between women and language policy and practice. So, in the study of word Englishes argues that we have taken sanitized view of language for too long. Consequently, word Englishes is beginning to fill the long-standing ungendered accounts with gendered accounts in language study. So hoping to gain a greater understanding of the ways in which social identity is constructed in different speech communities as English spread around the globe. So studies how that women and men hold different feelings towards the relationship to languages of power. So gender does not make a difference in language choice and in the constructions of identity. So next is the word Englishes and gender and power. So it's shared by both the feminist study of the language and study of the word Englishes is the notion of power. So language is a fundamental site of struggle for post-colonial discourse because the colonial process itself begins in language. So in tradition of gender studies, researchers studying language are generally sensitive to the power of language. Feminist theory is founded on the premise of male power and its aim is to explain the various structures that underlie the systematic oppression of women in the world, according to Cameron 1985. So the primary focus on the power, gender, and language began in the mid-1970s. So by the 1980s, the notion of gender inequity was replaced by the power-based view that women's language was a function of the existing power relationship between women and men. And women's relationship to language is different from that of men's. So women's access to the dominant languages is affected by various economic, gender, and familial pressures that do not affect men to the same degree. So that's difference. That's the difference of women. So next is in the tradition of William Lavov and Peter Gill, these women are gaining social status through linguistic means. So for the identity, the construct through their use of the language and actions are related to the nature of power. Women are influencing the choice of language by increasing the formal and functional ranges of English for wider communication. So next is bilingual women's creativity and world Englishes. So within the interactional context of the world Englishes, the term bilingual creativity is used for those creative linguistic processes which are the results of competence in two or more languages, according to Cutro 1986. So the sociolinguistic dimensions of bilingual creativity views the process of creativity in terms of acculturations and nativizations of the use of English in other circle. So recognizing the language types of discourse strategies and stylistic innovations as speech acts, code mixing and code switching, and genre analysis. So in studies examining the pragmatic aspect of politeness in the word English's context, speakers are clearly gendering speech acts. Yes, and in the discourse of English speaking male and female, so Julius students Bosayo and Elizabeth CAD 2002 and find that politeness plays a role in the constructions of gendered identities among Zulu men and women when speaking English. So, as in most studies on bilingual woman, the second or third language is often the language of a dominant group associated with power, prestige, and access to the economic benefits. This English-speaking bilingual woman then within their local communities may position themselves as both guardians of their mother tongues and innovators of language change. With English fast becoming the language of necessity around the world, women as primary language caretakers are advancing the progress of English, which in turn helps it to gain acceptance and merit alongside the 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 means alongside the regional caste and vernacular dialects both in private and in public environments. So next is the I forgot to fill in in the slides, but next is this is the last one, bilingual women's creativity and the literary canon. So expanding the scope of bilinguals' creativity in the world English is to include gender and discourse. A few studies show how gender may function as one of the means of shaping linguistic pluralism and diversity. So examine the linguistic and stylistic aspect in the fiction's writing of world Englishes and the influence of gender on writing styles. Wendy Baker and William G. Eggington, 1999, investigate bilingual creativity in several world English literature written in Indian, West African, Britain, Anglo-American, and Mexican-American varieties of English. So, they found out that women in this context are constructing new identities as writers, linguistic guardians, linguistic innovators, and transmitters of cultural and linguistic norms and values. So further, Valentine 2004 identifies 4 categories of gender identity that the writings in multilingual English users fall into. First, universalization. So meaning it's the next piece of human development. So interplanetary relations of a language. So the language here, it becomes a universal. So next is the linguistic mutedness. So mutedness here means inability. So language serves its creator, like what happens in the Philippines when the foreigner migrate here in the Philippines, and we are the one, the Filipino, who live in this particular place, who speak their language in order to communicate, and even Filipino will move to another country, we will also speaking their language in order to communicate. So that is the superiority of the English language, meaning the implementation of linguistic serves its creators according to the context. Next is the creative empowerment. Creative empowerment acting on their own authority. So meaning that is the authority of a language. So there is enforcement, so that the English should here applied, or else in some culture in that specific post-colonial place. So lastly, the linguistic defiance. So defiance means it's a challenge, something like a challenge of linguistics, so here linguistic resistance take many forms. Some writers challenge the dominant ideologies, others conform to dominant thought. In either resistance, these post-colonial writers adapt the colonial language to local needs, thus, as Katsuro suggests, sometimes appropriating the language as subversive strategy. So it is clear that the spread of English is not a neutral affair. Those who gain access to English may gain access to increased power, but simultaneously